Today, we will learn and reflect on the warrior cultures of the Iliad and the American Indians. Now, you may ask, how can we benefit when we ponder this comparison? We cannot truly understand the cultures of the ancient Greeks and Greek philosophy, culture, and history, nor can we understand and properly interpret the stories of the patriarchs in the Old Testament until we realize that these cultures were, by necessity, warrior cultures that were far less secure and far more brutal than the secure and peaceful existence that we take for granted in our modern culture. The similarities between the warrior cultures of the Iliad and the American Indian warrior culture that's described in the Tales of the Northwest is absolutely captivating. Both of these include stories of incredible stoic bravery, not only on the battlefield, but also incredible bravery shown by those who are not involved in the fighting. At the end of the talk, we will discuss the sources used for this video and the additional lessons we learned from these sources, and my blogs that also cover this topic. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments below. Sometimes these generate short videos of their own. Let us learn and reflect together. After you watch this video or before, we encourage you to watch our video that's an introduction to the Iliad, explaining how it helped Greek culture develop and what is the consensus of scholars on questions like, who is Homer? How was it written? Was the Trojan War history a myth? Was Homer blind? The Iliad is an epic poetry about the rage of Achilles. The first verses of the Iliad celebrate the rage of the great warrior Achilles. The very first word of the Iliad is rage. Rage, goddess, sing the rage of Peleus' son, Achilles, murderous doomed, that cost the Achaeans countless losses, hurling down to the house of death so many sturdy souls, great fighter souls, that made their bodies carrion, feasts for the dogs and birds, and the will of Zeus was moving toward its end. Begin muse when the two first broke and clashed, Agamemnon, lord of men, and the brilliant Achilles. Elizabeth Van Diver, who's a professor with the great courses that has an excellent series of lectures on the Iliad and another one on the Odyssey. She tells us that the Homeric warrior fights for honor, or time, and glory or fame, or kleos. In its most basic sense, kleos means what other people say about you. The most basic meaning of time is the tangible physical expression of honor in the form of booty, gifts, or a particular prize like a concubine, or geros. Time and kleos are closely related. One's kleos depends to a large extent on the time offered by one's peers. But kleos also serves as the only true form of immortality available to Homeric heroes. They live on what people say about them after they are dead. True warriors wish to die the noble death in battle. The biggest enemy of the Homeric warrior is hubris, the arrogant boastfulness that blinds wisdom and angers the gods, often snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. So, what was the source of Achilles' rage? Was he raging at the Trojans? No, his rage was directed at King Agamemnon, who had caused him to lose face when he took his prized concubine, the beauty Chryseis. Now, Achilles had no personal quarrel with the Trojans. It was the family of King Agamemnon that was shamed by the abduction of Helen from their household. And he refused to fight for the fellow king, who refused to show him the respect due as the leading warrior for the Achaeans. The decision not to fight doesn't count as bravery, but the first remarkable act of bravery occurs by a father trying to ransom his daughter, who was a priest to Apollo. For the first 10 years, the Greeks attacked and sacked the cities of the allies of Troy and carried off many of their young maidens as newfound concubines. King Agamemnon won the young girl Chryseis, while King Achilles won the beauty Briseis. Chryses, father of Chryseis, alone, unarmed, in broad daylight, confidently strides into the armed camp of the Achaeans, seeking to ransom his daughter Chryseis. The courage of Chryseis impresses the armies of the Greeks, but he is treated badly by Agamemnon. And all the ranks of the Achaeans cried out their assent. Respect the priests, accept the shining ransom, but it brought no joy to the heart of Agamemnon. The king dismissed the priest with a brutal order ringing in his ears. Never again, old man, let me catch sight of you by the hollow ships. Not loitering now, not slinking back tomorrow. The staff and the wreaths of gold will never save you then. The girl, I won't give up the girl. Long before that, old age will overtake her in my house in Argos, far from her fatherland, slaving back and forth at the loom, forced to share my bed. Now go, don't tempt my wrath, and you may depart alive." The old man was terrified. He obeyed the order, turning, trailing away in silence down the shore where the battle lines of breakers crash and drag. The priest Chryseis prays to Apollo, and Apollo sends a plague down upon the Achaeans, killing many noble warriors ignominiously. The Greek seer prophesies that the only way to end the plague is to return the daughter Chryseis to her father Chryses. And at length the Achaeans persuade Agamemnon that he must do just that after many Greeks have died from the plague. King Agamemnon has already committed one act of hubris by mistreating a priest of Apollo, so now he commits another act of hubris. All the concubines kidnapped during the raids have been distributed among the soldiers, so rather than wait for the next successful raid, Agamemnon decides to seize the concubine of Achilles, the concubine Chryseis, causing Achilles to lose face among the men. This is what causes rage to boil up inside Achilles. This is why Achilles decides he no longer needs to fight Agamemnon's battles. Now, many of you who read the Iliad complain about how confusing these very similar names are, but that may be the point. Chryses loves his daughter Chryseis deeply enough to risk death to seek her ransom. We see that in their names. And to King Agamemnon, one concubine is like another. Chryseis, what's the difference? Unlike Agamemnon, Achilles has no large family in Greece eagerly waiting for his return. Achilles can talk to his mother anytime he wishes, but she's a goddess that descends from the heavens. Achilles has no waiting wife, and his feelings for Chryseis run deep. The Iliad hints at this. She gets a line or two of dialogue, and when his best friend Patroclus dies in battle, she mourns over his body, just as Achilles does. So there's lots of hints in the Iliad that Chryseis and Achilles are indeed very close, much closer than you would expect from a concubine. So this first camp meeting between Agamemnon and Chryses was a camp meeting gone wrong, and it would set up the conflict depicted in the Iliad. There are parallel stories of brave camp meetings in the best book on the American frontier culture I have encountered, Tales of the Northwest. One is the story of Charles Hess. He was a half-breed, half-white, half-Indian, not by choice. He had a faint memory of his entire family being slaughtered, so he was raised as an Indian. But he was not so young that he lost his true identity, and he was not so isolated that he lost his understanding of the English tongue. He went to work for a fur trading company and married a Chippewa wife who bore him many children. When the company went bust, he found work with another fur trading company 300 miles hence, so he was forced to move with his wife and children to take the new job. They came across a herd of buffalo, and he galloped ahead to shoot some supper, but the herd spooked, and he was detained several hours, chasing down dinner. When he was gone, some Sioux Indians who had been trailing his little party attacked and destroyed the camp and all that was in the camp. This is the sad thoughts of Charles Hess as he surveyed what little remained of this camp. When I came a little to myself, I found that my children were not all present. There lay my wife, her infant nailed to her bosom with an arrow. There was my brave boy, his face upward, still grasping the knife he had drawn to defend his mother and sisters, his teeth set, looking defiant, though cold and dead. 5 of my children were there in one bloody pile, but my eldest daughter was gone. This did not console me, because I knew that some brutal savage had saved her, that she might become his wife. Our friend of Charles Hess had no choice. He swore vengeance, but he traveled on to his new post and fell sick for a week or so. But he heard some news of which tribe held his daughters. He made inquiries through intermediaries of what would be accepted as ransom. Charles Hess knows he has to pay a visit to the enemy camp, alone, unarmed, in broad daylight, walking tall. What does he experience when he enters into the camp of the enemy? Charles Hess saw in the enemy camp the scalps of his family hanging upon a pole, and the savages were dancing around them in triumph. He was greeted not with hostility, for the hospitality of the Sioux nation forbade that, but with evident exultation and insolence. Some braves sung the wrong they had done him. He presented himself before his daughter's husband or master, and uncovering his breast, he said, I am worthy of pity. This is my only child. Restore her, or strike me as you struck her mother. I am alone on earth. Lo, here is a ransom. The features of the Indian master showed some feeling. I am the only child of my father, he replied. The ransom is little, but you are old and need someone to make your clothes and moccasins and to take care of you. Tarry and partake of our cheer before you depart. And that's a feature of most camp meetings. You have to stay for dinner. Then take your child, Rising Buffalo, the name the Sioux had given him, and therefore none shall molest you. Fearful to irritate the Indian by any sign of impatience, the heart-stricken old man entered the lodge and sat down with his daughter to a dish of boiled buffalo meat. While peacefully eating dinner, a young savage who had assisted in the massacre of his family entered, and, holding out his bow and arrows to Hess, said, Here, Rising Buffalo, I used this once to your sorrow. Do you understand the use of it? Charles Hess, or Rising Buffalo, was in an enemy camp, wary, unarmed, outnumbered, but you just cannot let such insolence go unanswered. He sprang to his feet, seized the weapons, and drawing the arrow to the head, replied, Stand off a little, and I will show you. But the elder interfered. You are a fool, he said to the young brave. Go away and let Rising Buffalo depart in peace. The Iliad is another story of a brave man who alone in broad daylight, unarmed, dares to enter the Greek camp. Now Zeus was permitting the Trojan to best the Achaeans in battle, answering the prayer from Achilles to humble the hubris of Agamemnon, even permitting the Trojans to fight to the shore where the Greek ships lie anchored. Desperate, the best friend of Achilles, young Patroclus, asks to borrow the armor of Achilles and fights to the gates of Troy, only to die at the hands of the mighty warrior Hector of the Trojans. Enraged, Achilles now enters the battle, not to gain Kleos or glory, not to gain Time or honor, not to gain Garrus or bounty, but solely to revenge the death of his best friend Patroclus. In the last chapter of the Iliad, Achilles kills Hector in battle, avenging the death of his bosom friend Patroclus. Dominated by his rage, he drags the dead body of Hector first around the walls of Troy, where all Trojans can see, and then around the tomb of his dead friend Patroclus, where all the gods can see, refusing to give up the body for burial by the Trojans. The gods were offended by the hubris of Achilles showing disrespect for the dead, dragging the body of Hector around the gates of Troy for his wives and children and parents to see, denying him the proper burial necessary for him to travel to the place of the dead. On Mount Olympus the gods debate, and Zeus bids the goddess Iris to give a message to King Priam. She instructs Priam, You must go alone. No other Trojan may attend you. Only a herald can go with you, as he is an older one. You can drive the mules and smooth running wagon and bring the hero's body back to sacred Troy, the man that brilliant Achilles killed in battle. But have no fear of death, no dread in your heart. Such a powerful escort will conduct you. The giant killer Hermes will guide you all the way to Achilles' presence. But even so, this required a considerable courage, even though he was being escorted by a god. When they approached the Trojan camp, the gods put the sentries to sleep, so they would not touch the treasure-filled wagons of Priam, and the wagon pulled up to the camp of Achilles undetected. Agamemnon walks in, astonishing the soldiers, and pleads, Rever the gods, Achilles, pity me in my own right. Remember your own father, I deserve more pity. I have endured what no man on earth has ever done before. I put to my lips the hands of the man who killed my son. This is the turning point of the Iliad. We feel the deep empathy Achilles feels for his enemy, which breaks his rage. The deep empathy felt by Achilles for Priam finally helps Achilles accept the death of his friend Patroclus. These words stirred within Achilles a deep desire to grieve for his own father. Taking the old man's hand, he gently moved him back, and overwhelmed by memory, both men gave way to grief. Priam wept freely for man-killing Hector, throbbing, crouching before Achilles' feet, as Achilles wept himself, now for his father, now for Patroclus again. And their sobbing rose and fell throughout the house. There is yet another visiting the enemy camp story in the Tales of the Northwest, which is very similar to the story opening the Iliad. This is the story of the noble Sioux warrior Peyton Ska, or in English, White Otter. White Otter courted and married and was ever devoted to the young and graceful Tatoka, or the antelope. The squaws in the village noticed his devotion, whereas the other braves, when they brought back their meat from the hunt, they had their wives drag in the meat of the animals. White Otter would break convention and help his beloved Tatoka haul the carcasses of the large kills into camp. Like in the story of Charles Hess, the women were left in camp while the braves were on the move. But when White Otter returned to the camp, the lodges were cut to ribbons and a bloody trail marked where the bodies had been dragged into the river. Following the course of the stream, the corpses of all but Tatoka were found on the shores and sandbars. Unlike the story of Charles Hess, White Otter does not immediately go to the enemy Mandan camp to inquire about the whereabouts of his beloved antelope, Tatoka, for that would mean certain death. He was disconsolate. He swore that he would not take another wife nor cut his hair till he had killed and scalped 5 Mandan Indians. But like Achilles, even his hanging in the lodge of the 5 Mandan scalps taken in battle in the coming months did not ease his grief. But life goes on, and his family arranged for him to marry another, Chante Washte. But she was not like his beloved Tatoka. She was not an antelope. She was sometimes argumentative. Arguments he bore in silence. But she was not his beloved antelope. His life was not the same. One day White Otter came back from a hunting trip. One day he beheld another spectacle upon arriving at his lodge, a spectacle that drove the blood from his heart onto his face. There lay his new wife fast asleep by the side of her lover. White Otter unsheathed his knife and stood for a moment irresolute, but his better feelings prevailed. He returned the knife to its sheath and left the lodge without wakening them. Going to another place, he laid himself down, but not to sleep. Like the story of Achilles, this is a story about breaking conventions when virtue so demands. When the east began to be streaked with gray, he brought his horse, his favorite steed, to the door of his tent. Just then the lovers awoke, and the paramour of his new wife came forth and stood before him. He stood still. Fear of the famous hunter and renowned warrior kept him silent. The interloper knew he was toast. The guilty wife spoke not, but covered her face with her hands, till her husband directed her to light a fire and prepare food. At the command of White Otter, she placed a wooden platter before him and another for his guest, who knew he was about to die. And he screwed up his courage to meet his fate with the unshrinking fortitude that only an Indian warrior could show. He ate therefore in silence, but without any outward sign of concern. When the meal was ended, White Otter produced his pipe, filled the bowl with tobacco mixed with the inner bark of red willow, and after smoking a few whiffs, himself gave it to the culprit. Having passed from one to the other until the pipe was finished, White Otter ordered his wife to get her clothing and belongings and pack them in a bundle. And then White Otter rose to speak. "Another in my place, White Otter," said to the young man, "who detected you as I did last night, would have driven an arrow through your heart before you awoke. But my heart is strong. You sought her before I did, and I see that you would rather be your companion than mine. She is yours. And that you may be able to support her, take my horse and my bows and arrows also. Take her and depart, and let peace be between us." We see many similarities with the Iliad. We get a real sense of what it's like to live tense moments in a warrior society. We see what it is like not only to face the consequences of our actions, but also the actions of our enemies. Like Achilles, our noble warrior, White Otter is never really consoled. He decides life is no longer worth living. White Otter decides he will sacrifice his life in the enemy camp of the Mandans. While the Mandan braves are out hunting, our hero strides into the Mandan camp. But does he behave as the Mandans do when they strode into his camp? No, he destroys nothing. He does not lay a hand on the women and children and elderly. The tale tells us he entered the principal lodge, where he found 2 women who spoke to him, but he did not answer. He drew his robe over his face and sat down in a corner, intending to wait the entrance of some warrior by whose hands he might honorably die. The squaws have no idea who this brave is. They suppose he is a Mandan. They are unaware that he's a Sioux warrior. They are baffled. This is inexplicable. They leave him be, and when a few of the warriors return to camp, they inform him of their mysterious visitor. the silent, stoic brave sitting in the corner of the main lodge. The tale tells us the Mandan horseman rode straight up to the lodge in which he sat, threw his bridle to a squaw, and entered. The women pointed to their silent guest, and the Mandan warrior turned to White Otter and asked him who and what he was. Then White Otter arose, threw off his robe, drawing himself up with great dignity, bared his breast, and spoke. I am a man, of that Mandan be assured. I am a Sioux, and my name is White Otter. You have heard my name before. I have lost friends and kin to the arrows of your people, and well have I revenged them. See, on my head I wear 10 feathers of the war eagle. Now it is the will of the Master of Life that I should die, and to that purpose I come hither. Strike therefore and rid your tribe of the greatest enemy it ever had. The tale now tells us the primary virtue in a society of warriors, and this is the virtue. Courage among savages, like charity among Christians, covers a multitude of sins. The Mandan warrior cast upon his undaunted foe a look in which respect, delight, and admiration were blended. He raised his war club as if about to strike, but the Sioux blanched not. Not a nerve trembled. His eyelids did not quiver. The weapon dropped from the hand of the Mandan that held it. The Mandan opened his own vestment and said, No, I will not kill so brave a man. But I will prove that my people are men also. I will not be outdone in generosity. Strike thou, then take my horse and fly. The Sioux declined the offer and insisted on himself being the victim. The Mandan was equally persistent in this dispute, held out until at last the Mandan held out his hand in token of amity. He commanded the women to prepare a feast, and the two generous foes sat down and smoked together. The next day, the remainder of the hunting party arrived. There was much talk, some rough talk, and taunting that White Otter bore well until his new host explained all that had happened. And the author says how the prisoner had entered the village alone and unarmed, save with his knife. How he had magnanimously spared the women and children when they were at his mercy. How he had offered to negotiate a peace between the two tribes. The admiration of his valor overcame the hostility of the Mandans. Their hatred vanished like snow before the sun, and everyone acclaimed that he should be treated as became an Indian brave, and be dismissed in safety and with honor. At this stage of the proceedings, a woman rushed into the lodge, broke through the circle of stern and armed warriors, and threw herself into the arms of the Sioux warrior. She was Tatoka, his first, his only beloved, but White Otter did not return her caresses. That would have derogated from his dignity. But he asked how she had escaped from the general slaughter and who was her present husband. She pointed to the Mandan to whom she had the day before offered his breast. It was he who had spared her and subsequently taken her to be his wife. He now advanced and proposed to White Otter to become his kodah or comrade and to receive his wife back again. 2 propositions to which he gladly assented. For according to the customs of the Sioux, a wife may be lent to his kodah without any impropriety. For 5 days the Mandans and their new Sioux friend White Otter feasted. White Otter returned with his precious antelope and 3 horses laden with robes and other gifts, and over the coming months bands of Sioux shared a meal and smoke at the Mandan camps, and bands of the Mandan shared a meal and smoke at the Sioux camp. As the months passed, their hostilities ceased, and as the years passed, their hatred was forgotten. From that time forward, there was peace between the Mandan and the Sioux. And from that time forward, there was peace in the heart of White Otter, who was finally convinced that the curse of the Almighty had departed. Notice how the brave warrior White Otter so tightly hides his affections for the beloved Tatoka. He holds his affections even tighter than does Achilles for his beloved Chryseis. The Iliad points out briefly how Achilles has been sleeping with another maiden from Lesbos, just as White Arrow reluctantly accepted a new bride, but they were not the first beloved. Unlike our noble savages, Agamemnon shows no empathy for the brave father Chryses. He shows no hospitality to his brave guest. Chryses has never offered the obligatory meal. Chryses has never really granted an audience with the Greeks, and he is quickly turned out of the camp. So the Iliad begins with an enemy camp meeting that went badly, but ends with an enemy camp meeting that went well, reconciling Achilles to both Priam and the death of his best friend Patroclus. These warrior stories are captivating because they are stories about breaking conventions. When conventions are broken to increase virtue, fates unfolds favorably. But when conventions are broken and virtue decreases, fate takes a tragic turn. We have several more recent examples of brave camp meeting stories in the dangerous 5th century when Rome was invaded and sacked by barbarians. Now, Alaric had sacked Rome in 410 and died shortly thereafter. Perhaps this may have spooked Attila the Hun. Pope Leo rode out to meet Attila at his camp in the year 452, most likely with a ransom, to convince him not to sack Rome. More likely, like the warriors in our other camp meeting stories, the brutal Attila the Hun, who was undefeated, was impressed by the bravery and dignity displayed by Pope Leo as he strode unarmed into his army camp to persuade him to leave Rome in peace. Did Attila invite Pope Leo to break bread with him? More than likely, although the brief account of this famous meeting does not say. In 455, Pope Leo had another camp meeting with the Vandal king Genseric, but although he did not dissuade him from sacking Rome, he persuaded him not to burn Rome and not to molest the terrified residents who sought refuge in the basilicas of Rome. His courage in these camp meetings earned him the sobriquet of Pope Leo the Great, one of the few popes known as the Great. The Iliad has this passage from a warrior culture that reminds us that sometimes life is just not fair and can be somewhat random. There are 2 great jars that stand on the floor of Zeus's halls and hold his gifts. Our miseries one, now good times in turn. When Zeus, who loves the lightning, mixed gifts for a man, now he meets with misfortune, now good times in turn. When Zeus dispenses gifts from the jar of sorrow only, he makes a man an outcast. Brutal, ravenous hunger that drives him from the face of the shining earth, stalking far and wide, cursed by both gods and men. Now we look at the sources we use for our video. First of all, you have the Iliad. You can look at our first video for a little bit more explanation on that. A joy to read. We have the Tales of the Northwest. This is by far the best account of Indian culture and Indian life that I've ever run into. And it was actually written by somebody who lived in the Indian culture in the early 1800s. And we also have the Odyssey, and it mentions events in the Trojan War that's not really covered that well in the Iliad. In addition to the lectures by Mrs. Van Diver, there's also a series of lectures on masterpieces of ancient Greek literature by Professor Schenker and the great courses. Please click on the links below for our blogs on the Iliad and the Odyssey, and please click on the links for our YouTube videos on other interesting videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul. Thank you.